to everybody. It's the fifth anniversary, I'm sure you already know, of the collapse of the Arecibo radar and radar telescope. So to commemorate that, we've organized two short talks by Raquel Velho and Don Campbell, followed by some brief news and any discussion that anything anybody wants to just talk about, with the possibility for breakout rooms if desired. Is Raquel here?
Yeah, I saw her.
Okay,
Yes.
Monica saw her.
Hi, I'm here.
Hi, great. Hi, good to see you.
Good to
So
see you.
Raquel is our first speaker. We'll have two, as probably you all know, two talks now and in half an hour from now, and then half an hour later, followed by the news and discussion. So Raquel got her bachelor's in 2012 from the University of Nantes in France in sociology, master's a year later from Imperial College London in science, technology, medicine, and society, and a PhD in 2017 in science and technology studies, also from the University College London. She's currently an associate professor of science and technology studies at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. Her work focuses on the development of large socio-technical systems and how they are shaped and molded by marginalized and excluded users. And her current interests include the world of large-scale research infrastructures and their geopolitics. And at least one of her current projects is about the social and political history of the Arecibo Observatory, and that's what she's going to talk about today. So if you're ready, go ahead, Raquel.
Thank you, Brett. Thanks so much for the introduction. And I just want to start by acknowledging that I know that today is a very meaningful day for everybody here, the fifth anniversary of the collapse. And I know that a lot of people avoided. I've been speaking to a lot of people who avoided even watching the video of that day. And I know that it's a terrible loss and tragedy for this community here. So, what I hope to kind of do today is present the outlines of the project that I'm embarking on. I apologize in advance for people who were at the presentation that I gave while I was in Puerto Rico. Clearly, I'm no longer in Puerto Rico. I'm in upstate New York, where it's really quite cold right now. But for those who were there, there will be some repeats. I will try not to repeat jokes to whatever extent I can. And the other thing that I want to say and acknowledge is that a lot of you have either been interviewed or have spoken to me. Others may be hearing about this for the first time. And you are potentially already on my list, and I will be following up with a lot of you, I hope. And to others, I owe emails, so my apologies in advance for that. I will share my screen. I always find it helpful to have a little bit of slides. Please tell me if you can see this okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I don't really have a great title for this project beyond the Arecibo Observatory, A Social and Political History. I will be working on that title over the years. But where I want to take us today is to introduce the project and why somebody with the type of background that Brett offered got interested in this in the first place. I'll also kind of dive into the how of this project. How does somebody with a background in sociology really dive into large research infrastructures and what does it mean to do this type of research project? And then I kind of would like to offer space for any thoughts and comments on this. When I presented in Puerto Rico, I offered some initial thoughts. Obviously, that presentation was 45 minutes long. We don't have the time for that today. But if people are interested, there is a YouTube video. That presentation has been uploaded on YouTube by Abel Mendez, so we can provide the link for that. So the project and why. So in essence, a lot of this began back in 2016 when I visited San Pedro de Atacama with my mom. My mother is a researcher in science policy worlds, and it was Christmas Day, and most things were closed in San Pedro de Atacama, except for a free tour that you could do of the Atacama Large Millimeter Array. You can stop in the downtown of San Pedro de Atacama. A bus can pick you up and will take you to the headquarters, and you get this tour of the facility. And for some reason, that was something that was available to do on the 25th. My mother being a science policy researcher and myself having this background in science and technology studies, what else to do? This sounds incredible. So we went to tour the headquarters of Alma, and I remember just being really struck by what it means to build a facility like that in a location like the middle of the Atacama. So that kind of stayed in my head over the years. And as those of you in the academic world know, as soon as you get into a tenure track position, you're kind of forced to start articulating what a second project might be. And over the summer in 2018, I think it was 2019, actually, I read this book, The Glass Universe by Davis Sobel, who's a fantastic historian, especially historian of science. But she writes about the women who did the work at the Harvard Observatory. And one of the things that she's discussing in the book, also kind of tangentially, is how Harvard sent these expeditions to the South, especially Latin America and Africa, to find a location for the Southern Harvard Observatory. And they found a location in Peru that they went on to build. And the passage that she offers, the quote that she offers is merely, quote, with local approval, the Baileys christened the site Mount Harvard instead. Now, what's not given in my biography is that I'm actually Brazilian, born and raised. And I remember being really struck by this passage of what does it mean to have an expedition from an institution such as Harvard in Latin America to find a location to build a part of itself, a part of its own institution, and then actually impact the local geography to the name that they rebaptized, renamed the mountain. Davis Sobel doesn't offer the original name of the mountain, if there was one, doesn't talk about the process of gaining approval. What does it mean to gain local approval? So these were things that I started kind of piecing together in my head for a second project. I began to ask myself things like, how do we pick places for research, especially for fields related to space? When these locations are picked, how do those places get acquired? What is the process of negotiation with the original owners of the land? And then what agreements are made with locals? What does it mean to get local approval to name a place? And as I started kind of looking at all of these visual images of, especially in these cases, astronomical observatories, and obviously that's not solely the case of the Arecibo Observatory, but I started kind of noticing all of these beautiful, massive landscape pictures. And of course, from that scale, one of the things that I, as a sociologist, kept asking myself is, where are the people? In a lot of these images and a lot of the stories that were being told about the selection of a space, there was very little conversation about what was the micro that was going on at the same time. And as I kind of began to search for interesting case studies to study these types of relationships, what started popping up were tensions, really, really significant tensions between observatories and locales. So I think the quintessential example of that is the Mauna Kea Observatory that has had especially with a 30-meter telescope, has had long-standing debates with local populations due to the status of Mauna Kea as sacred land. But the square kilometer array also had issues in South Africa in the Karoo region because of land rights for a lot of people in the location, as well as telecommunication access. And then the entirety, the development of the Atacama Large Millimeter Array actually had labor strikes that delayed it for 17 days. And then looking closer to home in Brazil, I also became interested in rocket site development, or rocket launch site development, especially near Quilombola communities that were happening. And there was a lot of resistance from Quilombola communities who are descendants of freed or escaped enslaved people about local pollution. But then on the 1st of December 2020, in contrast to all of these really deep tensions, what I started seeing in the follow-up to the collapse and in the lead up even to the collapse of the Arecibo Observatory was a different story, was something of people posting under the hashtag what Arecibo means to me, this collection of stories of pride and joy and calls for reconstruction and a lot of local mourning, a lot of Puerto Ricans posting about what a sadness and what a loss it was to the island and how much pride they had for the facility that had been hosted on the island for so many years. And this seemed to me to kind of beg, okay, there's so many examples of tension, but then we have this other type of tension on the other side of the life cycle, right? At the moment of the end, rather than at a moment of inception or creation or building. So to me, the question of a life cycle of a facility is kind of what emerged. If there can be this type of mourning at the end, was there tension at the beginning? How did the relationship between local people, staff at the various levels of staff in an observatory, what type of relationships were created over the years? And what different phases of life has the Arecibo Observatory itself gone through from its creation through to this moment of collapse and then this kind of liminal period that it experienced for a few years before its closure, and now the opening of the Arecibo C3, the educational facility? And does its relationship with local communities shift over the years? So that's obviously a very specific case study, but I think I overall have this project ambition of investigating interactions between research infrastructures and the places where they are built. I do think that this is something that I could potentially be doing for the rest of my career. And I think that this is a kind of worthwhile endeavor because the overarching research question that I have is how does the hosting of large research infrastructures co-construct the locality in which it's hosted as well as the research infrastructure itself? So that co-construction question is, does being sited in a particular location with particular community engagement with the space actually change the type of science that is also being done in a location, in a research infrastructure? And then for me, what really matters about this is that I think we can learn in the process of doing this type of research to improve upon how we build large facilities for scientific research. I have an intuition that there's a lot we can learn from the Arecibo Observatory case that can both still be applied to the Puerto Rican case as well as helping other facilities worldwide. And what you see on the screen to the right is a screen capture of the Atacama Large Millimeter Array website through the National Science Foundation website, which it does have multiple sites because of the different funders that it has. So the Japan contributors, there's actually an ALMA website from the Japan funders as well, which I think is also very interesting. But one of the things that always captured my imagination is this benefits for the community list, right? There's a lot of claiming that hosting these facilities are really good for the community for all of these reasons, including education and outreach and telecommunications infrastructure. But there's very little follow-up in terms of how those benefits are distributed or how they are felt by local communities. There's a lot of justification at the forefront for the building, and then there's very little follow-up on the actual how people have felt those benefits over the years. So I think that this is an interesting way of, an important way of doing research because there's a lot of discussion in the siting aspect of a research facility in saying that, oh, you know, this place was perfect to do this type of research because of the climate, because of its location near the equator, like all of these questions that create a natural laboratory. There's a lot of discussion in science policy and science and technology studies about natural laboratories that are perfect environments for particular forms of science. So the Amazonian rainforest is often touted as a natural laboratory for biodiversity research, right? And I think that there's something interesting to use the social sciences and humanities to ask questions about what creates natural laboratories in terms of the geopolitics as well, and the national politics in the process of negotiation of acquisition of a site. So that's kind of the background of the project and the general sketches, but how does one do this type of project? I mentioned this in Puerto Rico. Science and technology studies is a really terrible branding, I think, for the field of research that I do. But in essence, it's what you see to the right is an attempt by Ben Martin and his colleagues to kind of map the wide range of disciplines that feed into science and technology studies. And in essence, it's a social scientific humanistic field of work where, you know, depending on your personal background, you might fit somewhere slightly differently on the map. Obviously, my background is in sociology, but I read and I collaborate widely with public and science policy, with philosophy, anthropology, and history. So we think very broadly across the social sciences and humanities, which means that my research framework is a mashup of all of these different areas. In particular, I think a lot with the research infrastructures agenda. There is kind of general agreement that in these literatures and science policy that we have a under research and under theorization of the societal impact of research infrastructures. There's been a lot of emphasis on concern for return on public investment, right? So social return on public investment. So now I'm trying to contribute a little bit more to this aspect. But my specific field of work is within science and technology studies is called infrastructure studies. This is a image that one of my PhD students created of me. I am proudly obsessed with what my Susan Lee Starr, one of my favorite authors in my field, calls boring things, which is why I did my PhD on public transportation. I think trains and roads are the most wonderful things. So I spend a lot of time thinking about infrastructures writ large. And the reason for that is that I think infrastructures tell us a lot about social assumptions. And the projects that I did about public transportation taught me a lot about how we build an infrastructure and the access and the roads to a space tell us about who we assume will be the users of that space. And the result of those assumptions and the shaping of infrastructure that those assumptions lead us down have a really long-term impact. So talking about public transportation in London, for example, a lot of the tube stations, the underground, was built in the 1860s, through the 1910s, 1920s. And in that period, disabled people were really not welcome in using or not assumed to be users of public transportation, in large part because they were institutionalized. So these assumptions mean that even to this day, accessibility to public transportation in London for disabled users is extremely hard, and fighting against the inertia that those assumptions have built into the system is really difficult. So I really think about the ghosts. I kind of think about them that kind of keep haunting infrastructures over the years. And I think those hauntings can happen through a specific design that has congealed into cement and concrete, but also can occur through particular types of assumptions in the actual policies that we design into an infrastructure. And the reason why I say that is I'm thinking a lot with that in the Arecibo Observatory with what it has meant for it to bring together three fields of science to do work within it, and how those fields of science may have worked really well for many years and then have been in tension with one another in other moments of the life cycle of the observatory. And then I'll mention this pretty quickly, but I also think a lot with Latin American social sciences, in particular, Oscar Varsavsky and Renato Dagnino. And the reason for that is that these are people who have been really concerned with the non-innocence of science and the social responsibility of science. Both of these authors are originally scientists who moved into the social sciences. And one of the things that they firmly believe in is that science has a social responsibility. So there's an idea of we do not only do work in the ivory tower, the work that occurs in an ivory tower does trickle down, and we must think about how that work trickles down over the years. In terms of methods, I have three key methods that I've been using. Archival research, the Cornell the Cornell Archives and Rare Manuscripts collection holds the Arecibo collection as well as private papers that have been very interesting and important to work with. Interviews, many of you I've reached out to or will be reaching out to interview, and then field visits. Most recently, I was in Puerto Rico. But what that has resulted in thus far is over 300 documents collected from online archival sources, one archival visit to Cornell, one archival visit to the NASA headquarters, who was also a partial funder of the observatory. I have planned for at least one more Cornell visit. And I can open the software that I use to organize all of these thoughts, but it's quite a collection of material that I'll have to go through in the archives. In terms of interviews, thus far I've done 51 interviews with 56 interviewees. I have about 3 to 5 more scheduled, and I'm hoping to schedule many more. And this too will be a challenge to analyze because each interview has lasted anywhere from 1 to 3.5 hours. So it will be quite something to go through this treasure trove of content, I think. And then my first visit to the Arecibo, and sadly only visit to Arecibo, was in 2022 to actually visit the observatory. So clearly post-collapse. I tried to gain access when I was just in Puerto Rico a few weeks ago. It was during the government shutdown, and obviously also on top of everything else, there are other access issues for the new Arecibo C3 space. So I wasn't able to gain access. I recently attended the Caribbean Space Summit, and then I visited UPR Mayagüez and UPR Arecibo. I did a brief visit to Barrio Esperanza. So there have been a couple of field visits that I've undertaken so far. In terms of next steps, more interviews to come. I'm still looking to interview many people, and as I mentioned, some of you are, and actually many of you are still on my list. So I will be reaching out and hopefully we can speak. But I'm also especially looking for non-research staff and community members around Barrio Esperanza. So one person has already offered to put me in touch with some people, but if anybody here has contacts that they may be willing to put me in touch with, that would be amazing. And then also, as I mentioned, there's a lot of data. So I need to do analysis and write up, and there's a lot to analyze. So the timeline there is long. I'm guessing at least 1 year for analysis, though I'm hoping to submit a first article about AOSA and Star Academy and the resulting networks from that in early 2026. And then I have a new curiosity that has emerged from all of these wonderful conversations with so many incredibly knowledgeable people. In part, I've become really fascinated with scientific communities that have been involved with the Arecibo Observatory over the years. And I'm curious what next for space research. And also, how did the Arecibo Observatory shape scientific communities and definitions of things like atmospheric sciences, planetary sciences, and radio astronomy? Because from what I'm hearing, I think that there's a lot to be said about how those groups within the Arecibo Observatory, but then how those groups training people over the years have also kind of guided those fields over the decades. So that's something that I hope to, you may have noticed, I have a lot of different areas that I'm really fascinated in, and I hope to be able to bark up that tree at some point soon. What I want to do is to tell an interesting, nuanced, and difficult story, but I would like to tell it well. I think to do this story justice, I have to take time with this work and with the narratives that people have entrusted to me over the years, or over especially this past year. And I'm really hoping to make this into a public-facing book, not a hyper academic book. I have written one of those before. It did things to my soul I would rather not repeat. And to make a bigger argument, I think I want to build a bigger argument about how we can build scientific infrastructures, perhaps in more, I don't know what the word is, but how we may be able to build scientific infrastructures in even better ways, and even the ones that we think are just looking at the sky. And then finally, I would really like to help communities think about how to get the most out of being scoped and selected as a development site for a future research infrastructure. I want to thank Abel Mendez for thinking with me on that one. He suggested that I write a white paper for local communities, which I think is really interesting. An interesting twist. I've been thinking a lot about white papers for scientific funders, but I think his point is compelling. So I think I have gone well past my time. I'm going to leave it there. Hopefully, there is still enough time for us to discuss together.
Thanks, Raquel. And sure, we can spend a few minutes for questions if there are any. Oh, Allison.
We're just clapping. Thank you very much for the lovely talk
Oh,
again.
Okay. Oops.
Oh, hi, Brett. Says Jan as well. I have a question for, for uprising observatories like the SKA, and we also have the 3D ice scatter radar radio observatory up in North Sweden. They are also located in areas, remote areas, probably not as sensitive to weather as Arecibo. But could you give me a comment on that?
Yeah, I can. And this is so thank you for that question. And when you're speaking about the SKA, do you mean the Australia site or the South Africa site?
Yeah, both sides actually.
Okay. So I have actually worked with Michael Gastrow. We have an article that is hopefully coming out soon that uses the SKA as one of our case studies. And the Atacama Large Millimeter Array is another one. I think one of the things that is really interesting about talking about remoteness, and remoteness is often used also to describe the Arecibo Observatory, is that it's a difficult thing to pin down what we truly mean by the term remote. If it's just a question of difficult to access, or if it's the fact that, quote, people don't live there. The case of the Atacama Large Millimeter Array, I think, is a compelling one, because though the antennas, the array itself is very far removed and truly difficult to access, the headquarters themselves aren't. The headquarters themselves are pretty close to a community called Toconao, and it's one of those places that people have argued it would be really good for this community to have the Atacama Large Millimeter Array there because the headquarters will be close and it will be good for science education, it will be good for jobs. These are kind of repeat, I'm going to call them offenders of argument.
Yeah.
And I think that more often than not, when we talk about remoteness, we think that it means absolutely zero people, but it never does.
No.
And I think even those small communities need to be included in this conversation and the argumentation around it. And it also has to do with how we think about landscape. It's one of the two different things that in geography research they talk about space and place. We can talk about a space as being remote, but it's still a place and a home to some people. And it's important that we think about what it means for it to be a place for those people.
Now I understand, but for instance, with the SGA, both in South Africa and also in Australia, like they are in remote places, there could be problems to get enough power, right? I don't
Yeah,
think
absolutely.
the 3D ice jet facility up north in Sweden won't have that problem because we have a lot of hydroelectrical power up north. But anyway, those are also things one should consider when establishing a facility, a large facility, I mean.
Yeah. Yeah. And on that note, I think that it's always really interesting to remember that infrastructures like a research facility are dependent on all other forms of infrastructures as well, right? You can't just build it without having all of the interconnecting, without water, without electricity, without telecommunications. And I think that all of those things need to be thought about kind of tendriling together. And how that work is done and by whom, I think is really, those are really important questions.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, thanks. Any other questions for the moment, or if it's perfectly good to ask them later as well?
I'd like to offer a comment. My name is Layla. I was an undergraduate and graduate student in astronomy and worked at Arecibo. And then I moved over to working in public affairs, and I worked at Fermilab, which is a very large national research lab. And it's in Illinois. And the public affairs department there did an amazing job of sort of accounting for the effects of the lab on the local community. And especially, I did a lot of interviews of contractors who, for example, supplied the magnets for the accelerator. So one of the first things I think of in terms of the impact is how much money is involved. I think Fermilab, there's a lot more, there's probably more money flowing out into the community because of all the construction that had to occur, continually as the facilities were upgraded. I don't know if that's comparable to all the astronomy facilities. And I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you so much, Layla. That's really important for me to chase that information as well. I hope it's okay if I reach out to you. I would love to hear about your work with Fermilab as well.
Sure.
Would you mind putting either a private message? I put my email in the chat or however is easiest.
Sure, I'll send you an email.
Thank you so much.
Okay, I think we should probably move on to Dawn's talk. We're technically 8 minutes late for that. So, and perfectly good to ask more questions later. So Don Campbell is our second speaker. He completed his bachelor's in 1962 and master's in 1964 in physics at the University of Sydney and PhD in 1971 at Cornell on radar interferometric mapping of the surface of Venus using Arecibo. At the same year, in 1971, he joined the staff at Arecibo. And in 1979 to 81, he was the associate director of the observatory. From 1981 to 87, he was the director. In 1988, he joined the faculty of the Cornell Astronomy Department. During the 90s, he was involved in the second major upgrade of the telescope. And also during the 90s, 1993 to 2003, he was associate director of the National Astronomy and Ionosphere Center, which is the institution which managed Arecibo Observatory for Cornell and the National Science Foundation. And in 2008 to 2011, he was director of NAIC. He's currently a professor emeritus of astronomy at Cornell, and he is author of the recently published book, I think in January of this year, with the title, The Arecibo Observatory, A History of Innovation and Discovery. So Don, you're happy to have you here and you're welcome to go ahead.
Click. Thank you, Brett. Appreciate that introduction. This is a difficult day in many respects, especially for those of us who have been associated with the observatory for so many years. The reminder of its collapse five years ago today. It was in operation for 57 years and was used to make groundbreaking discoveries in studies of the upper atmosphere, radio astronomy, and planetary radar. And I was going to say that many of you were involved with Arecibo, but I'm impressed by the number of people who are actually online here today that, frankly, many of the names I don't actually recognize. And so I appreciate the extensive interest in this session. The success of the observatory was due of course, let me just share my screen if I can find how. There we go. And from the start. And press all your audio. The success of the observatory was due to the construction and such a unique telescope. Was driven by one person, William E. Gordon, and that's quite unique. That one person sort of totally dominated the idea for the telescope, its design, raised the money for it, and organized the construction, and actually moved to Arecibo in 1960 in order to oversee the actual construction work itself, along with 4 other people from Cornell associated and their families. And this was quite unique, I think. And of course, the telescope was continually upgraded over the years. And greatly increasing its capabilities. That too was somewhat unique to Arecibo. I think the changes made to the Arecibo telescope were much larger, I think, than virtually any other large astronomical telescope. And I'd like to say that its success was also due to everyone who worked at Arecibo or Cornell for the observatory. There was an incredibly capable and dedicated staff ranging from scientists, engineers, technicians, maintenance, and general support staff. And the most satisfying years of my working life was when I was at the observatory. I'm going to be just concentrating on the telescope itself. There isn't time in this short talk to talk about all the scientific discoveries were made in the 3 fields of research at the observatory. And so I'm just going to go through, say, the progressive changes to the telescope, say, over the years. And I hope that people are not. Let's see. I just wanted to. The book was mentioned by Brett, but it gives you a detailed history of the observatory and what, in terms of its construction, management, funding from the National Science Foundation and the various people that were involved. And so it's, if you need to know anything, it's a place to go. Bill Gordon, who was the who conceived of the telescope and, as I said, organized its construction, etc., came to Cornell in 1948 as to direct from the University of Texas to direct the Cornell radio astronomy project. Cornell was the first person into the field of first university into the field of radio astronomy in the United States, starting in 1946. And this is just a photo of Bill back then in the laboratory building of that small observatory in Ithaca, New York. And he's talking to Charles Seeger. And for those of the more, perhaps the more elderly people, Charles Seeger was actually the brother of Pete Seeger, the famous folk singer at that time. And so Bill Gordon was involved in propagation studies, and you could propagate radio waves further and further if the reflection layer was higher and higher above the Earth, and that sparked his interest in the ionosphere, and so he came up with this idea of actually building a telescope and radar system that could actually investigate the ionosphere to heights of hundreds of kilometers. In a seminar that he gave in May of 1958, you don't have to read this, he pointed out that the objective of the radar system, antenna radar system he wanted to build, was measuring the electron density and electron temperature as a function of height and time at all levels in the Earth's ionosphere. And there were several other things he wanted to be able to do with it too. But down at the bottom, there are two items related to obtaining radar echoes from the Sun, Venus, Mars, and possibly Jupiter and Mercury, and receiving from certain parts of remote, somewhat quaintly, receiving from certain parts of remote space hitherto undetected sources of radiation at meter wavelengths. And oddly enough, it was mainly the radar program that was very important to him, obviously, because it dictated the where the telescope was going to be. It had to be near the equator because the planets were only overhead, with about within 20 degrees or roughly 20 something degrees from the equator. And B, it forced the telescope to be able to actually track. For the ionosphere, which is just straight above our heads, you just needed something to point it straight up. But if you wanted to do radar studies, you had to account for the round trip radar time, flight time to the planet. And for Venus, that's 5 minutes roughly. So you had to be able to track the telescope for 10 minutes. Or if for the Sun, it's 16 minutes round trip time. So you need to be able to track it for at least 20 minutes. During the seminar, Gordon showed that what was needed was an antenna with about 1,000-foot diameter and a peak transmitter power of about 1 megawatt, operating at a frequency between 200 and 300 megahertz, later changed to 400 megahertz just for sort of practical reasons related to the transmitter. Gordon was also fortunate that he had people at Cornell that were very helpful in getting the project going. One of them was Bill, and here's Bill Gordon talking with Bill McGuire and showing a model of the telescope. There, Bill McGuire was a professor of civil engineering and an expert in steel structures, and obviously important for this particular telescope. And he stayed as the go-to person for structural problems of the telescope for decades. And in this model, the telescope's a parabola with a central tower, and the focus is near the top of the tower, and at the top of the tower was going to be several horns that could be moved in and out and rotate in order to provide some steerability. It's only a small number of degrees, but a long focal length for a parabolic telescope can do that. And as I said, it needed to, this is what dictated the need to be near the equator. But the IT came up to change from a spherical reflector to a parabolic reflector, from parabolic reflector to a spherical reflector in March of 1959. The advantage is, as I've talked about, is you can see that you would be able to steer the telescope up to about 20 degrees from the vertical, allowing about 2.5 hours of tracking time for celestial bodies. And the disadvantage is, though, that a spherical reflector only partially focuses an incoming plane wave. And so you needed something to complete the focusing, and called a corrector. In the case of Arecibo, it was what's called a line feed. It was 90 for the particular one that Bill Gordon wanted to build, was a 96-foot long tapered slotted waveguide. But no one had actually ever built such a device. And so this was actually a major gamble that Bill Gordon and his associates took to make the telescope much more flexible. And so the funding was secured from the Advanced Research Project Agency of the Department of Defense, and the design firm selected, leading to Bill Gordon plus 4 other Cornell-related families, people with their families, moving to Arecibo in the summer of 1960 to oversee construction, the contractors, and build the needed electronic equipment. And some of these people here, the George Peter, there's the four people: Tom Talpe, Merle Lalonde, and Al Johnson as business manager. But also they moved as they came down in 1960 with their families. And it's quite an adventure, obviously, for all of them. But then I also wanted to show the first electronic engineer, Miguel Feijó, who was employed to help out, and also the second one, Domingo Albino, who was in charge of the transmitter, and the first technician was Jose Pepe Lopez. 2 other people here, Marshall Cohen, who came to run the radio astronomy program in 1964, and Bob Forrest, who was a photogrammetrist who came down to precisely measure the shape of the reflector. Work started in September of 1960, and it was supposed to be finished in March of 62, which was hopelessly optimistic, as they discovered. And it was a very difficult task, converting a sinkhole, that you can see in the first slide here, in this location, into a smooth, properly shaped terrain to hold the reflector system. It was a major task. And then, of course, building the towers and suspended structure. And so, but it was finally finished in 1963. And that just shows the telescope with its wire mesh surface, which limited, because of the irregularities in the wire mesh, limited its highest frequency to about 600 megahertz. And there's a very happy Bill Gordon, close to near the end of the project. Inauguration was in November of 63, and success. This is a profile of the electron density in the ionosphere from 100 kilometers to more than 500 kilometers. A noise-free profile, as you can see, that was obtained on 11th of November 1963. So Gordon's dream of being able to study the ionosphere using Coherent scatter techniques had been realized. In September, Gordon resigned as observatory director and returned to his faculty position at Cornell. However, the line feed, this long tapered, 96-foot long tapered slotted feed that was designed and built by Alan Cohen of TRG in Boston, it worked pretty well. It had the right beam width, about 10 arc minutes. It transmitted circular polarization and received 2 circular polarizations, which is what was required for both the ionospheric work and for the planetary radar work. And so a lot of initial, say, work in the 3 areas, radar astronomy, radio astronomy, and ionospheric studies could proceed. However, its efficiency, it had very high side lobes, and its efficiency was only about 40% of what had been expected. As I said, that didn't deter using it effectively, but especially for planetary radar work, where you worry about where the gain or effective area is needed for both transmitting and receiving, the loss in sensitivity was about a factor of 6. And there was a lot of effort over several years to figure out how to build a new one. But the final solution was done by Alan Love of the Aeronautics Division, North American Aviation, who designed a line feed that actually worked. And it was installed on the telescope in early 1972. You can see it in the right-hand image. But there was ambition here. The radar studies of the planet and radio astronomical observations would be greatly improved by access to higher frequencies and higher transmitted power. Frank Drake, who was director of the observatory from 1966 to 1968, did some preliminary studies and looked as though feasibility studies, and it looks as though it would be possible to actually resurface the reflector, and the suspended structure was stable enough to be able to be used at higher frequencies. There were management changes. October 1 of 69, the National Science Foundation took ownership of the observatory from ARPA. In 1971, the National Astronomy and Ionosphere Center was formed at Cornell. It's NEIC, and took over the management of Arecibo with Frank Drake as the first NEIC director. The NSF made it clear that support for the upgrading program was dependent on efficient line feed being developed. And as you saw, that was finally developed and installed in 1972. And that's Frank Drake in the center here with 2 graduate students, John Campbell and Hal Craft. Hal Craft was the later director of the observatory from 1974 to 1981. And so the upgrading proceeded. NASA put in $3 million of the cost because of the planetary radar work. And it was completed in 1974. There were 38,778 1 meter by 2 meter shaped panels to cover the full 1,000 feet of the reflector. And a 0.5 megawatt transmitter at 2.4 gigahertz was installed for planetary radar observations, especially the imaging of the surface of Venus. The Arecibo message that many of you, I'm sure, know about was actually transmitted at the dedication to the globular, and it was transmitted to the globular star cluster M13. There was a lot of, and you can see Frank Drake there and Congressman Davis on the phone to the control room to tell them to start transmitting the message. There was a lot of controversy over the message. It was sort of giving our position away, but the M13 is like 25,000 light years away, so we really didn't have to worry in the short term. Just a few people who were involved with that. Jose Maldonado in the upper left-hand center image was in charge of facilities at the observatory, and just an amazingly good engineer, and managed was the local manager of the upgrading. There are a number of people in the right-hand image here. Don Cook, Vice President of Cornell, Merle Lalonde, Tor Hagfors, who was the site director at the time, Jose Maldonado, Rolf Dice, who was the associate director of the observatory, and Frank Drake as director of NEAC. In the lower left, the president of Cornell, Dal Corson, is helping out to put in the last panel. That's just a vision of the receiver room with all the electronic equipment, and Carlos Hernandez looking at something, not sure what. And I just wanted to point out how important the staff, and they were mainly from Puerto Rico, were to the successful operation. It was an extremely good staff in all areas, electronics, maintenance of the telescope, etc. And this is the electronics group in 1983. Resurfacing the reflector was then, and going to higher frequencies, made people think about, was there a better way to actually focus incoming radiation and form a true point focus? This means that you could do it over a wide range of frequencies, and you didn't have to build line feeds, which were inherently narrow band for every frequency you want to observe. And so and so there was a plan. Frank Drake actually in 1981 came up with the idea and demonstrated with others that in fact a dual reflector system would give you a single focus, and also would distribute the sensitivity of the telescope in the appropriate way, tapered illumination function on the telescope correctly. There was an interior cabin that would have a rotary floor in the bottom that hold all the receivers at different frequencies, and the transmitter would be in the upper deck. You couldn't actually, you had to actually put the transmitter itself at high frequencies like that in the actual dome. The there was also a ground screen 50 feet high to shield the receiver systems from ground radiation, and you can see an image of the transmitter there. Numerous people were involved in this, and can't go through all of them. Tor Hagfors, when he came back to Cornell to be director of NEAC in 1981, really got involved in planning for the upgrade, and set the stage for it actually to start in 1992. Lynn Baker and Persimmon Kittledale did the dual reflector design, and Lynn did a lot of the organized a lot of the construction. Of course, the construction was done by contractors. And Jose Maldonado, this is actually the same image I showed early, was the project engineer. Kurt Samuelson was the project manager after 1994, when Ben Huhout, the initial one, had to retire due to health problems. And I'm showing Kurt sort of hunkered down behind the concrete wall there, because he was watching the dome being lifted to the structure, enough to make anyone nervous at the time. And I like to, this is not the telescope, but I want to comment that at the same time as that the Gregorian upgrading was taking place, the visitor center was being built right on the edge of the cliff overlooking the telescope. It was funded partly by the Angel Ramos Foundation of San Juan, and it was an impressive large structure which increased with a lot of educational programs, and there were about 30,000 school children from Puerto Rico came every year to the observatory and to the visitor center, and the total numbers increased from about of tourists and students increased from about 30 to 40,000 a year to over 100,000 a year. Daniel Altschuler was the organizer behind the construction of the visitor center, and the Cornell president Frank Rhodes is sitting there at the time. And two last things: all the feeds receiver systems were just single beams on the sky, as was typical for astronomy. But in 2004, a 7-beam system was installed at 21 centimeters wavelength to look at atomic hydrogen in our galaxy and distant galaxies. It was built by the Australian Telescope National Facility of the CSIRO. They'd built one for their 64-meter Parkes telescope, and it worked extremely well, despite the receiving horns being right next to 1 megawatt, the horn with 1 megawatt power of the S-band transmitter, of the 2.4 gigahertz transmitter that's coming out. It didn't seem to bother the system. And finally, the last change that was actually made to the telescope was to build an ionospheric modification system. There had been a large one down near the coast that was actually destroyed by Hurricane Georges in 1996, I think. And this is basically you're pumping up a low frequency, 5 to 8 megahertz in this case, up into the ionosphere, where it interacts with the electrons there, speeding them up, and you get all sorts of nonlinear effects. And so in order to build a new one and based at the observatory itself, there was a subreflector was installed here, and radiating dipoles down to the base that reflected off the subreflector to the main dish and up. And then there were 6 transmitters, and they could operate 150 kilowatts each at 5 to 8 megahertz. So this is quite an impressive modification to the telescope. The subreflector had reflected at 5 to 8 megahertz, therefore large spacing between the wires, and didn't affect the actual operation at the high frequencies at all. So I'll stop there almost. This is Bill Gordon in 2003 at the 40th anniversary of the observatory, looking happy, and when he visited. And I haven't talked about the collapse of the telescope. It's a difficult topic to talk about, but there are 2 reports: an engineering report by Thornton Tomasetti, the Arecibo telescope collapse, a forensic investigation, and the National Academies issued a report, failure analysis of the Arecibo Observatory, in October of 2024. And both reports are available online. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Don. That was a great talk. Thanks. Anyone have any questions or comments?
Yes, of course, Brett, I'm here.
Naturally.
I would just to tell you, we had Professor Per Simon Kildahl in
Yes.
Sweden, involved in design in the Gregorian dome.
Yes, I pointed that out there with Lynn and Lynn Baker worked together.
Unfortunately, he passed away in 2016,
Yes,
and was happy to not to see the disaster.
mm.
But send him away to heaven
Mhm.
with the new radio telescope.
Yeah, he was I met him a number of times. He was a very, very helpful and nice person.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Any other questions or comments?
Another one then. Great talk. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, it was. And I also, I think I have to say also that your book, Don, is incredibly impressive in the explaining the complex details of all of the history and development of the various systems and, year by year of the observatory. It was very interesting and impressive. And I was also quite interested in the slide you showed of I think it was the outline by Bill Gordon that mentioned not only planetary radar, as you pointed out, but also radar of the sun, solar radar. And I was curious, you were involved in that personally, and I was curious what you think might be current interest in that kind of thing if it were to be possible again, or what your thoughts are about it, if in particular.
Yeah, it's a difficult a difficult thing to do, frankly. But I don't have any, I'm embarrassed to say, I don't have any strong opinion on whether it would, I haven't really been looking at the science for quite a few years and where we stand there, and whether it would be a really good thing to do. But it would take a very large radar system to be able to detect it. We got bare detections at 40 megahertz. I didn't mention that, but there was initially a 40 megahertz radar system on the telescope as well, with the dipoles around the 430 megahertz line feed. The reasons I don't understand that it was never used effectively for doing ionospheric studies. That was what it was installed for. It just somehow or other didn't work out, and I've never understood why. I used it to measure the electron density of the interplanetary medium by bouncing radar signals off Venus at 40 megahertz and 430 megahertz and measuring the time difference. And we made attempts to detect the sun and got marginal detections. I think they were real, but nonetheless marginal detections. And it was used to do radar mapping of the moon also. And the reason, as was the 430 megahertz, as has been the 2.4 gigahertz radar system, the advantage of 40 megahertz is that it penetrates a long way, several wavelengths into the lunar surface, so you can probe deep into that surface.
Yeah, that's it.
Brett, could I ask a question?
Yes.
This is Joanna. I couldn't figure out how to raise my hand. Um, I mean, thank you, Don, and thank you, Raquel, for wonderful talks. But as Don was laying out all of his research for what happened to Arecibo over its 57 years, I was impressed that the wish list in making improvements and big changes seem to have been pretty complete. And I wondered if in his research he'd seen any of wishes that people wanted to push that didn't get funded or didn't get implemented. Was Arecibo lucky in the way that the upgradings proceeded as successfully as they did?
I think we finally ran out of ideas as to how to improve the performance of the telescope. Frankly, Joanna, and the Gregorian upgrade was sort of the final effort. These all took a long time. You notice the first thoughts of the Gregorian upgrade was in was in 1981, and by Frank Drake, and then was pursued vigorously by Tor Hagfors starting in when he arrived in 1992, I guess, um, and 1991, and sorry, 1981. And for 10 years, he left as director in 1991. But of course, didn't get finished till 97. So, that was a 16-year span. And so, you had to have a lot of patience, shall we say, for these things to actually happen in terms of getting the design done, and then of course raising the money, getting the NSF and NASA. In the case of the Gregorian, NASA and the NSF pretty much split the cost, and that worked out well.
So just a comment yeah, about the 40 megahertz. I guess it is a mystery why the 40 megahertz was decommissioned. I guess there's not really any, as far as I know, aren't really any records that have been found about it. And I think uh, that, um, that one idea of why it wasn't, uh, I think an idea of John Matthews, who wrote a historical article about Arecibo and the radar systems, it was that there was the 430 was so successful, and it really a lot of attention was paid to that, and very little was left over for the 40 megahertz, which as had much more complicated and perhaps hard to understand data from the ionosphere, and which has been pursued very successfully since then and during that time, and since then at Hikamarka, of course, at 50 megahertz. But
Yes.
just one idea I remember John Matthews mentioning.
Yeah, I was just want to mention again to you, Don. You showed a short picture of your book about Arecibo. Could you please send us a note on chat or something? I would be very interested to buy it for our library.
Oh, you'll find it, well, you can buy it directly from Springer.
Yeah, but we could have a link. You know,
What?
I'm lazy
I'll do that. I'll do that.
Okay,
for
thanks.
everybody.
It's unfortunately rather expensive. My disappointment with Springer is how expensive it is as a book.
All right. Now we have refurbished our library in Uppsala. It was disbanded in 2000, and then we got it back again.
Oh,
So we're
good.
refurbishing it.
Okay, that's great.
All the books went to Uppsala University, and 50% went to the waste basket.
I can't imagine why you would get rid of a lot.
That's another story. Sorry.
Although sadly, the Arecibo Library was basically similar thing happened to that, and about 1,000 pounds of reports and books and theses were shipped to Cornell, and I think the rest of it was junked.
Idiots.
Mhm.
Okay, you get it.
Mhm.
It's not only the Puerto Rico or the United States horrors.
Yeah, this was after the collapse, of course.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, but it would be great. Oh, thank you very much. I see it now. Thank you.
Mhm.
Anybody else have a comment or question?
Yeah, I want to say thank you, Don, for a really great historical talk. I've been trying to resurrect something at Arecibo for a number of years since the collapse, and I was actually talking with the director, Francisco Cordova, during the collapse, and had some ideas of how to save the telescope before it collapsed, and we went back and forth, and then ultimately time took over, and that was the end. So, so I started talking with Francisco about trying to come up with a design to rebuild it, and I was employed by Lockheed Martin Space Systems, and we wrote a proposal and sent it to NSF, and we had a lot of discussions, or I had a lot of discussions with different parts of the government, and nobody really wanted to step forward and spend some money. So we recently got a new rebuild design approved and released to a couple of individuals who worked on that proposal, myself included. And Ed Staub is a brilliant scientist who worked on the new design, and we've tweaked it a bit since then, and trying to look at ways to send it to the private sector to get some sort of traction. Unfortunately, today is not like years past. Well, in some ways, in other ways, it's still very difficult to get anything through. They always ask for a price tag, and you have to kind of make something up, because to really know what things are going to cost, you have to do a lot of detailed engineering. And so I have a lot of ideas. We've had a lot of discussions, and I'm hoping to show something about the design, since we now have rights to it. So when the time is right.
Looking forward to hearing the details of all that, and Lynn Baker would be there also, who's definitely the right person.
If the time is good, Brett, I can show what the concept is.
Oh,
okay, sure, go ahead.
that would be good.
I have to find out where the present menu is.
I could just mention one other thing, that a potential remaining upgrade at Arecibo, which was also experimented with, I think, in the 60s, would be multi-static receiving of the radar signal, such as was done at ISCAT in the original ISCAT system, and greatly improved in ISCAT 3D, and also is being implemented now at Hikamarco, where basically you instead of getting a resolution and information only along the radar beam, you also get a three-dimensional vector look at a common volume in the ionosphere, which can be rapidly moved around with modern antenna systems. So that was something that was I'm pretty sure it's mentioned in Don's book. But anyway, that was experimented with at Arecibo, but that could have been that is definitely being implemented in modern radar systems today. Go ahead if you're ready.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see.
Okay.
It's only
Well,
the top part
yeah.
of the PowerPoint.
We're not seeing any reflector.
1 second. I'll get it. You have to bear with me. I have to try and figure out how to get this thing to. Yeah, just got to get the full screen going here. Sorry, I wasn't totally prepared on this. Here we go. Does that work? Can you see?
Well, we can see something, yes.
Okay. So this is just one slide that kind of captures everything. The picture in the middle is the concept. And let me briefly describe that. It's a optimized secondary, which is suspended above, that is designed to compensate for spherical aberrations of spherical design. This could either be a rebuild of the old design using similar type panels, but it would be built up to a hemisphere. And a hemisphere would give you steerability to 45 degrees from zenith, conceptually. And it would also deal with some of the terrestrial radio frequency interference from, say, the radars on the island. And this design is meant to be incremental and adjustable so that you could switch out the feed. Instead of 1-ton steel cables or 3-ton steel cables, you would have ropes that would be made out of a very strong material. You don't have to support 900 tons of structure or superstructure. The subreflector could be composite. It could be made to go up and down with spools on the towers. And I just took advantage of a picture of the original telescope and kind of modified it in this photo. And the green rail that you see actually sits below the dish. And then there are this blue arc is a rotatable platform. The transmitter receiver are shown in the center in that picture, but in the cartoons that I have left and right, they are mounted on an orange arc that rotates around. So it gives you 360-degree azimuth. And in terms of elevation, there's a secondary collimator that takes the energy from the subreflector during transmit, which would be the right-hand side, and then it focuses it to, in the transmitter, it goes from the collimator to the secondary and up into space. And on the left-hand side is a receiver configuration where it receives the energy into the dish and then it bounces to the secondary, which is again optimized to compensate for spherical aberration, focuses it down to a collimator, and then the collimator sends it to the receiver, which is on the left-hand side. So I have lots more details on how that works. But down on the left shows ray tracing designs that my friend Ed Staub created. And the first one just shows the spherical aberration. The second one shows a Cassegrain geometry, which is a convex reflector. And then the right one shows a Gregorian concave subreflector. So that was initial design. Just include that to show that the spherical aberration is compensated for. And then I have these, let's see if I can, I'm sorry, I don't use Zoom for presentations a lot. But this is a cartoon that shows how this works. And this is a transmitter using a phased array. So you can see the phased array is the thing that is in the beam. It transmits down to the collimator, and the collimator has a reflector at its focus that sends the energy up to the secondary, and then the secondary, and so the energy up to the secondary is purple if you have color. And then a beam comes down to the primary, and then the blue and the arrow show that it's going up into space. And this all looks pretty congested, but in reality, all these components are small compared to the size of the dish, or the bowl in this case. And if I move through this, so in the radar configuration, you saw that we transmit through the phased array, and then we receive through the collector, which could be any cryo-cooled reflector. These could be either optimized for the particular experiment you want to do, they're replaceable. And this design is a progressive design, so you can build some of this incrementally to keep the cost down. And so the receiver, it could be something like a VLA, next gen VLA antenna, or something that's modified to fit into this environment. And then we would move the secondary and the collimator and transmit again and receive, transmit again and receive. And you could see we could go all the way up essentially to 45 degrees. Now, all of the details of this, the reflections, interference, and all that need to be scrubbed to make sure that it's all workable. The designs need to be fine-tuned. And we had a study proposal into NSF to do this, and they sat on it for a long time. And I kind of got tired of trying to get government sponsors. So I got the design released to my team, and we're interested in trying to get private investors. So those pictures that I showed before had this articulating feed that would essentially take the collimator and put it into a parabolic beam or a linear beam, collimated beam to the receiver in that picture. We replaced the original design, which Ed Staub came up with, was a parabolic, a paraboloid, which would be the collimator. And the focus of the secondary coincides with the focus of the paraboloid. So the energy then becomes collimated, and in this case, it's transmitted from the phase array to the collimator. It goes up to the secondary and then goes out into space. In the receive geometry, you move the collimator to point at the receiver, and the energy coming back from space, or if you're just using it in pure receive mode, what you're looking at in space comes to the collimator and gets redirected to the receiver. And this runs along this orange arc, which is a rail that contains the collimator. And it can rotate around. This little green rotator shows and the arrows here show the whole assembly. Rotates around to get the azimuth receiving and transmitting. And then again, you steer it up the rail, until you get where you want to be. The combination of azimuth and elevation give you a full 45-degree cone observation up to from 45 degrees to zenith. And so you can track anything in the sky by essentially programming all of this to move in conjunction with what it is that you're looking at. You could study the moon, you could study planets, you could study much of what Don talked about in the original telescope design could be done here. The real advantage of this design, other than it being adjustable and replaceable in terms of components, is that it can do collections and transmission at multiple frequencies, and everything geometrically is ray tracing, meaning that it's frequency agnostic. Of course, at low frequencies, you have to have larger apertures, and those need to be optimized. So I will talk more about this some in the future, but I just wanted to give a teaser, and that's all I have for now.
All right.
Thank you, Robert.
Yeah, thanks, Robert.
You're welcome. I look forward to being able to do this in the future.
Robert, Debussy has a question in the chat, and she's wondering if you have a cost estimate, just a ballpark rough order of magnitude.
So that's a really good question, because we wrote a proposal to NSF for $2 million. Originally, the study was $5 million, and we kind of met at $2 million. But the problem is down the road, after you do all the engineering design or the initial engineering design, you have to do the real work. And the real work, realistically, I mean, in today's dollars, it's pretty hard to kind of put a number on it. But we just kind of said, like $500 million to build all of this stuff. And I think that is a realistic number. Unfortunately, I say unfortunately because nobody really wants to pony up that money. But the private investors, for these billionaires, I think that's probably pretty easy for them, right? So somebody that's interested in science, I think, should take a look at this and understand it, and also understand that it doesn't have to be paid for all at once, right? Because you do a lot of the engineering up front, which could take quite a few years. You can do experimentation with parts You can invite the local universities. You can have a lot of ideas on how to do this most efficiently. Um, I think doing this outside of the government is probably, today things pretty much have to be done outside the government if they're science. And when the government does things, it takes a long, long, long time. And this project will probably take several years, probably beyond my lifetime. But if it gets off the ground, and that's what I really want to see happen is to see the work kind of become more realistic and materialized. And I think it's a great concept to start putting pieces together. I mean, the platform, the area is just sitting there. It's conducive to rebuild with the existing geometry. You can tile up the bowl in this case, much like you did with the original telescope, and then make modifications. A lot of ideas on how to do that. I don't want to spend too much time on that, but the cost is really difficult to get a handle on. But incremental funding probably is the right way to do it. And I know investors usually don't like to hear that, but I think that's really where we should go. And it makes the whole thing much more tractable and realistic. And we could have schedules and planning and all that to make it work. And as part of the study we wanted to do for NSF, we had a cost element where we were going to refine the numbers on what it will really cost. Unfortunately, that $500 million, I think, scared away people that the government doesn't have a lot of money to spend, especially in scientific endeavors. The other missions just couldn't get off the ground. So, and I retired, and I'm no longer working for Lockheed Martin. So I'm trying to get some traction outside of the government to make things work.
Okay.
I'm probably talking more than I should.
Okay. Thanks, Robert. That's very interesting. And that's obviously a long-term ideas for Arecibo. There are a few shorter term things, projects related to Arecibo. I don't know if the one that's currently, I think, about to open is the C3 program. I don't know if Abel is here or Allison wants to say a couple words about that.
Hi, everybody. The Arecibo C3 will be opening this January. It's not decided yet what particular day. They will open partially the museum exhibitions to the general public. And I have to remind everybody that those exhibitions are containing all part of science. There's a section for the legacy of the observatory, but there's representation for all the sciences there. And they will keep doing the workshops that they are doing now as a pilot project, but then they will continue those workshops, usually through Saturdays, on other days.
So the C3 is a student opportunity for local and maybe non-local students. Is that correct?
Yes, it's an educational center with education and research experience, especially mostly the research experience are in biology, but they are open to people to join with other activities. So they have a room and space available for ideas that they will consider. So that's why in the last year they have been having different workshops including radio astronomy, for students, high school students, and even teachers and professors, and they go to your institution if you need a workshop, because they want to train also. They want to give workshop there and to train people there.
Okay. Any questions? Okay. So there are a few other interests and projects going on related to the Arecibo site and the past data. I think Joanna wanted to mention a few things about the pulsar data and analysis publications. Is that correct? Is Joanna still here?
I could say just a couple of words. Kind of remarkably, all of the observations that I and my colleagues made since the Gregorian upgrade ended up on our computers. And so they weren't delivered as part of the shipment to Texas that seems to have kind of gone into a black hole. I hope I'm wrong about that, but anyhow, so there's observations on 250 pulsars at 2 or 3 frequencies that are analyzed and are ready for use. And I am looking for a home for those observations so that they can be shared with the community. And they're analyzed, they're usable, and there's certainly other things that could be done with them, but it is a very large Arecibo compendium or trove of 2 or 3 frequency pulsar polarized pulse sequences. So if anybody has ideas, please let me know. Thank you very much.
All right. Any questions about that? Okay, so
Hi, Joanna.
Oh, go.
And I am surprised to hear that that data is outside and it's not preserved, but you got it. So we are trying to put together a kind of a small museum within the UPR Arecibo library. It will be a museum to preserve the legacy of the observatory pictures, but we also want to include digital content. And I was thinking mostly digital content and documents, but probably because we're working with other projects preserving data for other telescopes, we will like to see at some point that. So eventually, if we have the computer space to preserve additional data for the astronomical community, because we are already doing that for other projects, then we will consider the Arecibo data too. But that's great to know that you have the data. Thank you.
There certainly is no place where it would be more appropriate than in Puerto Rico. And as part of the UPR program, Allison and I had some vague talk about it when I visited last year. But we're talking about something like 10 terabytes of data, which seems to me a huge amount at the time. It's not such a huge amount these days. So anyway, thanks for your comments.
Yeah, that's easy. That's easy.
As possible.
Yes, that's easy. That's good.
All right, thank you. And so there are a couple of projects also going on related to the hardware at the site and use of the site for research. And Allison, do you want to talk about the 12 meter and maybe CARS as well?
Sure.
All right.
Can you hear me okay? I guess that, yes. Okay, so nice to see all of you people today. Thank you for joining for this meeting. I'll keep the updates brief. But basically, I'll start with the 12-meter telescope. We are interested in using the 12-meter telescope that's still at the Arecibo site, and I've been putting some effort towards this for a couple of years. So for those who aren't familiar with the 12-meter, it is a 12-meter diameter radio dish that's on one of the hilltops at the Arecibo site. It was brought to the site in, I think, 2011 for a VLBI phase referencing dish, and wasn't used for standalone observations necessarily in any other context until it was upgraded with a wideband cryogenic receiver. And that upgrade work towards that started in 2021 after the collapse of the 305-meter, when NSF had put quite a bit of money, several $1 million towards the observatory for Hurricane Maria repair funds. And since some of those funds couldn't be used for the big telescope, they agreed to let us put it towards a new receiver for the 12-meter telescope, partially hoping that that would help keep the observatory active for as long as possible. And so the process of trying to get the receiver built started, around 2022, and it was actually installed on the telescope in June of 2023. Unfortunately, by then the decision had been made to decommission the observatory and basically transition it to a STEM education center. And so that meant that the telescope wouldn't be used and it needed to be mothballed in August of 2023. So we did, 2 months of observations with the telescope. And we were able to see that it worked actually quite well for the original science cases that it was intended for in the upgrade proposal. And that kind of inspired us to try to see if there was any sort of way that we would be able to use it again in the future, in whatever the observatory would become afterward. So currently, we're calling ourselves a 12-meter consortium. There's 4 UPR campuses involved in the consortium, and also University of Central Florida and Yale. And then we also have several community scientists involved with us. We have written, we were trying to look maybe for private funding routes, because NSF was pretty clear that they wouldn't be calling for proposals. There would be no intent in the near or probably even distant future to put any funds towards research instruments at the site. But when we asked on several occasions if anything could be done, they suggested that if you came with private funds, it might be an option. So we talked to date, I think we've talked to 3 foundations. And one of those foundations helped us first kind of open the conversation with NSF, because out of these 3, we have had a positive response from all 3 of them in one way or another, either by directly expressing interest in funding something related to research activity at the Arecibo site, or in putting us in direct contact with someone that they knew was interested in doing that. So we're kind of, 3 for 3. And I think that's a really positive indicator of how many people out there are interested in seeing scientific activity happening at Arecibo. So I think that whole process has been very encouraging for me. And when we approached NSF with this news, they were very open to, they have become much more open to discussing us being able to use the site. And we have actually been working on technically an unsolicited proposal in the format of basically an MRI proposal that says we want to use this instrument and this is why, and this is how we're going to do it and how we're going to operate it. And by the way, we're going to do it without any additional federal funds from NSF. And this is how. And so that's kind of what our proposal is about. Unfortunately, we're currently victims of the government shutdown, as I'm sure many other people are too, in the sense that we are in the very last steps of this proposal. And there's going to be, I know that there's going to be a delay, but I don't know how much of a delay right now. So we were so far along that we hope to have access in early 2026, because this has basically started a conversation with NSF about how to use the site, how to have groups come in that might want to pay to use the site or pay their own way, in addition to the NSF funded projects that are there. And there's a lot of logistics involved in figuring out how to get all of those, get these kinds of groups onto the site. And it's a fairly new process for NSF. There aren't many examples in observatories that NSF runs, but there's a few. So a lot of the discussions have been around the logistics of that, not so much any kind of unwillingness to have anything going on there or anything like that. Just they don't want to, they're not going to be able to fund any research activity there. So I hope to have a more solid update after the first of the year. Maybe we'll have something before, but if we meet early next year, I hope that we'll have a solid and very encouraging update. Still very optimistic because even the NSF administration has been very enthusiastic about this as a future way to use the site. And so I think that any delays that we encounter are kind of, out of everybody's control, and that when we are able to make some progress, we will. So hopefully we'll have some good news around the early part of next year. Happy to talk to people if anybody is interested in, approaching foundations. We have been thinking about that a lot. How to get foundations, to put in money together, how to, sort of, it's unknown territory for many of us. So many of the people in our group have been putting a lot of effort on that. And if anybody wants to talk about it individually, we're more than happy to do that. If anybody has questions, I'll be happy to take them. But let me not spend too much longer about that. Brett, I think you also asked for a CARS update.
Sure, if you want to, go ahead.
A quick one. Also, for those who don't know, CARS is a research institute at the University of Puerto Rico, Maya West. And CARS, the acronym, stands for the Center for Advanced Radio Sciences and Engineering. So this is a research institute centered in the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering, but it's multidisciplinary. It has several engineers from UPR Mayagüez, an astronomer, several external collaborators at other UPR institutions at UCF, and others, and then also a couple of other faculty. It has even humanities involved at UPRM, and so it's an interdisciplinary, intercampus collaborations and also external collaborations. And the focus of the center is on the mitigation of radio frequency interference, and it aims to address RFI in multiple ways, both in the hardware sense and in the software sense. A lot of the focus is on radio astronomy because a huge initial goal of the CARS Center was centered around the use of the 12-meter antenna also. So CARS was, this CARS proposal, I guess, was initiated in around 2021, also after the collapse of the 305-meter. And as plans for the 12-meter antenna ramped up, it was very natural for CARS's plans to weave into that as well. So CARS is also still keenly interested in using the 12-meter. And hopefully will be along with us sometime next year. But what else to say? I think the Institute itself has grown tremendously and kind of like found its way. It's a huge thing to manage. So many different departments within UPRM, many different collaborators in the island and outside, industry partners for the engineering groups and so on. So a lot of different things to manage. And I think that now what we really see is a lot of growth, a lot of excellent projects, a lot of excellent collaborations. Tons of students are in our groups. Every single group has undergraduates, graduate students, and a lot of really excellent results coming out. We are about to have our NSF review meeting starting on Wednesday. So it's Wednesday to Friday of this week. We have biannual review meetings with NSF. So we may have at the end of this week also another update on the 12-meter when we talk to our program officer. We do know that they're not visiting us this year. Normally they come in person. But I think that the shutdown ended too soon, and there's probably many other things going on. So they won't be coming in person, so it'll be online with NSF. But we may have some updates about the 12-meter after that, and we certainly will about the center. So happy to take more questions about it. If anybody is in Puerto Rico and wants to come, there is a poster exhibition in the Student Center of UPR Mayagüez of CARS research projects and research projects around the island in astronomy from 9 to 12. So you can get in touch with me or just show up at the Student Center if anybody's around and interested.
Right. Thanks, Allison. Any questions about that? Okay. So I have something. So the 12-meter was among the instruments at Arecibo that were not damaged by the collapse of the platform. Yes. And there are several other radio and optical instruments that, besides the 12-meter, in addition, that could be operated for continuing measurements. Mm-hmm. And the HF and 430 are mainly intact, but they both rely on the dish. So by HF, I mean the high frequency ionospheric modification system that was mentioned by Don in his talk.
Yeah.
It, as he mentioned, it operates at a few megahertz, and so very low frequency, basically the lowest frequencies and longest wavelengths that were used with the dish. So which means it's relatively easy to remake or patch up the dish, some kind of wire mesh that was similar to what was used originally in the 1960s. Several of us, in collaboration with the University of Alaska, Fairbanks, are working on a proposal to restore and restart the ionospheric modification facility, which is basically a high power, high frequency transmitter, and used primarily for ionospheric research. As I mentioned, the primary thing that would be needed is to repair the dish so that well enough to operate at long wavelengths, very long wavelengths, the lowest ones, at a few megahertz, and restore the subreflector, which would require suspending it from the towers. I could go into, there's many more things, many details involved, but that it does look promising. The towers, the tops of the towers were broken off in the collapse, but the towers have been restored, and that would have to be looked into a little bit. So we have a strong science case and a promising funding source. And we are working on the details of some of the logistic requirements and the costs for that potential funding source. And we expect the cost would be something like $10 million for just to do that, and then additional to restore it, and then probably additional costs for actual operations. We've been in touch with NSF, and as Allison, similar to Allison's experience, they seem to be fairly positive about the ideas as long as somebody else pays for it. So if anybody has any further questions or wants to get involved, they can contact me or ask questions now.
What are you, Brett?
Go ahead, whoever.
Brett, what are you going to use to interrogate the heated volume? Sounders?
Yeah, there's optics, radio measurements on the ground of radio emissions, which are stimulated radio emissions powered by the electric field of the high power transmitted radio wave, and sounders, as you say, HF ionospheric radars, shortwave radars, basically. And there are also some possibilities for satellite measurements. But this is not uncommon. It's basically what is typically used at HARP in Alaska and at the Russian Syrah ionospheric modification facility also. So obviously an intercurrent scatter radar is useful. You can see additional things with that, but for the science items which we have in the science case, it's not a requirement.
Brett,
Mm-hmm.
John here. So what I understand from the Arecibo HF heater, all the transmitters are intact. The only thing you're lacking are the antennas, right? That was crashed.
Yeah, the dish itself, about 2/3 of the dish remains. Of course, it's all.
There were like three times two dipoles, right?
There were, if you're talking about the transmitting dipoles, there were 3 cross dipoles at 8 megahertz and additional 3 at 5 megahertz. And I think roughly, I think there are enough to make one new ring of dipoles, enough that were undamaged.
But the actual transmitters, the power system,
That's
intact, right?
Yeah, that's intact, exactly.
So what I'm saying is that the only thing you need is a new set of dipoles. Okay, you don't have this fantastic Gregorian feed for HF that was built into to Arecibo before its crash. But
Yeah.
still,
Yeah, the Gregorian wasn't used for the HF,
Yeah.
actually.
You're still going to need some way to get the power from the transmitters down to the dipoles. Those heliaxes aren't there anymore.
They burned up.
Well,
So
they did more than burn up.
I feel.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you need the transmission lines and the dish and the subreflector. Yes. But we don't need the same upgraded dish. We don't even need a dish as good. The dish in the 60s worked up to above 400 megahertz, obviously.
No, what I'm saying is that you have the transmitters, you have the power system and everything. The only thing you need are the antennas. And I don't know how to fit like 3 times 2 dipoles in the dish at the bottom of the Arecibo dish into something like an array. I don't know if that could be made or nothing.
Well, that's what it was done. I mean, that's the system that was used before the collapse. There were 3 sets of 3 cross dipoles, one for 5 and one for 8 megahertz, that basically poked through the dish and transmitted up to the subreflector, the suspended mesh.
It was excellent.
So that would be something like that, probably improved. There's several improvements that could be made relatively easily as long as you're doing it. And that's what we're proposing.
Yeah, but with not as a huge cost as building a new dish, right?
Well, you do have to replace the dish, but it's a much less expensive dish than the one that was destroyed in the collapse.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions about that for now? Okay, so I guess Jan, if you want to talk about 3i Atlas.
Yeah, I can do that. Could I share a screen?
All right, you should be able to.
And I will do this very quickly as you asked me. I'll hope it's the right one.
Yeah, we're hoping Jan can give a normal talk about
No, I won't.
in a couple of months, but not right this moment.
Anyway, maybe I should do it. This is, can you see my screen now?
Yes.
In full screen. So this is about the 3i Atlas observations, very, very shortly. I was surprised in the mid of my vacation when I got a message from ESA saying that they would observe 3i Atlas. The thing is that we get trajectory orbits like every week from ESA. And this was like, I got it like in August. And anyway, it turned out that the 3i Atlas, as you may heard about, not only from science perspective, but also from some people who believe that this is an artificial object sent from outer space with aliens. Anyway, so to the left in my front, there is the first picture of 3i Atlas from the 1st of July. And you can see that there is a huge background of stars. And that's because the 3i Atlas objects are probably coming from the center of the galaxy, which is quite interesting. And it was also extremely fast, like incoming velocity of something like 60 kilometers per second or 58 or in and out. And also you can see to the right, there is a small GIF, if you can see something moving. It's the Atlas traversing the solar system, and it was coming in from down, and then coming in and was quite close to Mars, and there were some observations not quite good, and some others, and it would also pass through Jupiter on its outbound trajectory in March 20 next year. Okay, I'll jump on. So we made a campaign with the JUICE spacecraft, which is on its way to Jupiter, because there is a good chance to observe the comet. And we had a campaign now during from the 2nd to the 25th of November. And however, we have to wait until late February, before we can downlink the data, because basically the comet, as well as JUICE, is on the opposite side of the sun, and the data link right now is something like 10 to 20 kilobits per second every 3 days. However, there was also the perihelion, the closest approach to the sun, was on 29th October, so we hope that there will be a huge tail from Atlas, and there was also simultaneous observations with the NASA Europa Clipper spacecraft on the 5th and 2nd November. And from what I heard from Clipper is that they got a signal, good signal from the passing through the tail, perhaps. JUICE, we have 10 instruments on board, and there are a few which are really good for observing this comet. So we have a sub-millimeter instrument, which operates in 600 gigahertz and 1100 gigahertz, which is extremely sensitive to water, like and also infrared visual camera, ultraviolet, and also electric neutral atoms instrument from Johns Hopkins. So this will be quite exciting to see what comes down when we eventually get the data. However, this object is probably too small for planetary radar. So the maximum diameter has been expected to be something like 5.6 kilometers in diameter. So, however, there will be more interesting objects probably coming, because I don't have it in this slide, but I don't know if you heard about the Vera Rubin Observatory. So they just got online also now during the summer, and happened to chance to point their observatory in the right direction to capture 3A Atlas. And they got in 2 nights, with 10-hour observations, they discovered more than 2,000 new asteroids. So I think this is probably just the beginning of a new era, where we will see more and more interstellar objects coming into our subsystem or solar system. And with that, it would be great to have the capability of a planetary radar. So that's all. Questions? Comments?
Well, if there was enough money around, you could just rebuild Arecibo with slightly improved declination coverage.
Exactly. I love you.
I mean, I
Sorry.
regret that wasn't pushed early on after the collapse.
Oh, I can tell you that there are numerous of space ground observatories observing 3 Atlas. And also this case with JUICE was a bit fantastic, because we have argued all the time with ESA that we should do science during cruise. They say, no, it's too expensive and too complicated. But suddenly, there was 3 Atlas, and everybody got in line.
Yeah. That's really interesting. Any more comment on that? So is there any other particular comment or news that anybody wanted to mention?
Tapasi had her hand up.
Okay, go ahead.
That wasn't my hand. I was just giving a thumbs up
Oh,
for.
okay, thumbs up.
But I could just ask a question to Jan. In that
Yeah.
case, has there been from anywhere in the world, has there been any good radar work in the last 5 years that Arecibo Observatory has not been there?
Could you repeat, please, Joanna?
In the last 5 years that Arecibo radar, planetary radar is not there, can you, has there been any good work done anywhere in the world about using planetary radar technique? I know 1 or 2 of Green Bank work, Green Bank higher frequency radar that was doing some maps. Apart from that,
Well, Green Bank is, I assume, still investigating how to install a high-powered radar system on the 100-meter telescope. Otherwise, there's a little bit of work, oddly enough, going on in Australia, and also the NASA 64-meter is still, or 70-meter now, I think, is still doing some work, but that's about it. None of them have the capabilities of what Arecibo had.
how about the Chinese telescope FAST?
FAST. The problem there is that you can't put a high-power transmitter in that. They've got this small dome that holds the receiver systems. There's no way to put a heavy transmitter and feed it. So I don't think FAST is a great receiving system. And I guess I did hear that the Chinese maybe can put a transmitter on a 60-meter telescope, or roughly, and then receive with FAST.
The thing here as well, if you can see the graph on to the right, is that the comet is on the other side of the sun, as happily we were with Zeus as well. So there were no possibility. So there were no possibility to observe the comet from ground stations during the perihelion.
Right. Yeah. Thank you both to Don and Jan. Thank you.
But as you can see as well, it's there are some conspiracy theories out there. It's because this seems to be a perfectly engineered journey across our solar system.
True.
So, Jan, what do you hope to see in November?
During the November campaign, we are pretty far from the comet. We are about 0.4 AU, but we have a camera. Clipper also have a camera, but the lid on the Clipper camera is not still off. They will wait until 2027 to lift it off. But Clipper, on the other hand, has a good chance of passing through the tail itself and make actual in situ measurements, which we can't do from Zeus. But on the other hand, we have 10 instruments on board, and 5 of them are engaged in seeing the comet tail, which is it's huge. It's supposed to be huge. So we hope to get some information, or some better information from our observations of the comet about the constituents of the tail. we can't. We will not be able to see the nucleus. I mean, JUICE is not made for astronomy observations. It's made for looking at the moons on the moons of Jupiter.
What do you think about the tail observations that were made previously that said it was very short, or it was facing the sun, or
Yeah, it was weird, but it turned out it seemed to be like an ordinary comet. There were some observations of an excess of nickel instead of iron, and there was an excess of carbon dioxide instead of water. But well, we'll see.
very interesting.
There is a really good Wikipedia site about the 3I Atlas observations, which I would recommend you to look into, because I think this is really it's just fun.
Right.
I will believe that this is about the same as as we were when we started to look at the exoplanets, and there were a few of them, and then it's just increased exponentially. And now we have observed like 5,000, 6,000 exoplanets. Now we have like 3 objects have been flying through our solar system. But with the new observation facilities, I believe there will be an expansion, an exponential increase with good opportunities for planetary radars, such as the previous Arecibo Observatory capabilities.
Yes, and the Chinese are also working on building a planetary radar system, and the estimate that Mike Nolan made, whether he wants to take credit, it's a very rough estimate. It should be, based on the information that's available, comparable to the former Arecibo planetary radar. But when it's finished, I don't know when it will be finished. And they also have built an atmospheric radar with the modern vector radar capabilities that I mentioned earlier. So in addition, combined with FAST, they are in a good position to take over the various capabilities that, or at least some of the capabilities, many of the capabilities that Arecibo had. So it might be in our national interest to pursue some kind of replacement for Arecibo.
Indeed. I agree with you, Brett.
And I also wanted to mention briefly that ASAP, who organized this today, ASAP stands for the Arecibo Science Advocacy Partnership, and we support what I just mentioned, what we've just been talking about, the continued use of the Arecibo Observatory site for education and research, as already mentioned, using the existing data sets, past data sets, existing undamaged instruments, and restoring the use of other instruments such as the HF. And as Robert White talked about, we support the idea of a new and improved radar and radio telescope at Arecibo for all of the reasons already mentioned. So ASAP is you can be an official member of ASAP. And Monica, do you want to explain that? We have a treasurer, a board, and a treasurer among the board members, and Monica will explain. Yes, can you, is Monica?
No, you have to unmute you.
No, you unmute yourself. I could do it if I could find you.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, I'll stop sharing.
Afternoon or evening. Okay. Whoops.
Hi, Monica.
There. Coming through?
Yes, you are.
Okay, okay. Yeah, that's yes. Okay, as he says, payment dues are required to become a voting member of ASAP. And the suggested contribution is $50 per year, but it's minimum is required of $15. And if you're a student, it's just $15. The dues are due in January, so coming up soon. And we have two methods of payment. The preferred method is Zelle, Zelle, and because it doesn't have a charge to us for on your part or on our part. If you pay through Zelle, then the payment should be sent to treasurer@areciboscience.org. And there can be a name associated with that email address. It could say Monica Larson. It could say Joel Weisberg. Anyway, it'll get to the same account. So the second method would be PayPal, and you can do that through the areciboscience.org site. You scroll down where it says Join Us and press on the yellow button that says Donate. But there is like a 3-something% fee if you do it through PayPal. That's why we prefer Zelle. So, Brett, can you type? Have you typed in the treasurer@areciboscience.org?
Treasurer what?
He's typing it in the chat.
I put it into the chat. Monica's the treasurer. It's the email for Zelle is treasurer@areciboscience.org. It's in the chat.
I don't see it.
Oh, do you not see it?
No. Does anyone see? Oh, the 21 new messages. Okay. Now I see it. Okay. treasurer@areciboscience.org.
So also, I'm not sure if you got, I'll put it, maybe it's already there, but I just put in the link to Raquel's talk on November 7th. And well, this is recorded also, so this will be up there. We can send out the link.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know Zelle. I see the note that Zelle is only for transfers in the United States, and many are abroad. But PayPal is international. I think I don't know about that. I think people have paid.
I think PayPal is international.
Yeah.
Okay. Are there? Mute yourself. Well, thanks everyone. Any final comments or
Yeah,
questions?
I haven't talked to Dawn in about 20 years, so I just want to say hello from Layla and Randy.
Right, I was thinking about Layla, so we've been quite a long time.
Yes, Alicia is now almost 25 years old.
Oh, wow. Where are you?
In Irvine, California.
Irvine, California. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Do you still have the same address in Ithaca, Dawn?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm only living part-time in Ithaca these days.
Mm.
I would
Well,
like
thanks.
to say I would like to say my thanks to Brett first of all, and also to Monica. I was in Arecibo the first time in 2010 together with my daughter, and then again in 2016 for a fun but fail campaign with the swarm satellites. But anyway, you're always such a nice guys, and I love you. Thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to say thank you also, and for the opportunity to talk about the new design. In my background, I have one of the HF antennas that survived the collapse, and you can see what's left of the dish behind it as well. So, or part of it anyway. Also, this is my daughter in the control room. So I have lots of photos that are pretty interesting. So I could share those if anybody's interested.
Yeah, you're another candidate for a talk in a couple months, maybe, with more details. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Brett.
So anything else? Final comment?
I just wanted to thank you for organizing all of this, and I guess I'm too late to thank Allison, but it was certainly wonderful to meet with all these folks, and I learned a lot, and hope that maybe something like this can be done more regularly.
Yeah, thanks, Joanna.
I'm still here, so you can still thank me, Joanna.
Oh, you're still there. Sorry. Yeah. Okay.
No, I'm just kidding. I miss you and hi. And I think it's a great idea to do this more regularly. So I hope that we can meet again at the beginning of the year.
Right.
You know,
That works
one idea that Mary and I had was a theme on what's been lost.
Mm-hmm.
And to some extent, that's obvious, but there's a lot that isn't so obvious that perhaps would be interesting to Raquel. Maybe she'd even have some ideas about how to guide that discussion. But anyway, that's just a thought to throw out.
That sounds like a great idea.
Okay.
However, having a sociologist in a midst can be helpful. I am happy to help.
Thanks, Raquel. Thanks again for your talk. And
Yes,
the
indeed.
fun
Thanks so much. Bye-bye for now.
Yeah. Okay. Bye, everybody.
See ya.
Thank you to both of the speakers and thanks to Brett. Bye, guys.
Okay.
Talk
Thanks,
to you
Allison.
soon.
Thanks, Phil. Bye.
Mhm.